Belgrade, with its combination of advanced thinking, advanced theory, creative theory, rigorous contention of models, plus the dream and action of building a new art school, really brings my interests together. And in many ways, I hope to learn from this experience as much as I hope to bring something to it. I recognize that I might be some kind of contaminant, in the sense that I'm coming from the outside in many ways, in a kind of double, triple frame. And I think that's really interesting, to have those discursive frictions, to have those conceptual frictions, and to have productive frictions that bring together new ways of thought for everybody involved. And I'm hoping to learn from this encounter as much as I'm hoping to contribute to it. I was not only trained as an art historian, I was also trained in literature. And so I already have that as kind of a formative experience of studying both art history and literature, and thinking across different disciplines from very early on. I was also an editor of a journal named Res, Anthropology and Aesthetics, which is a journal dedicated to the study of the object through different disciplines. So it's not so much transdisciplinary as multidisciplinary. And I think that for me it's always been important to think and to envisage the power of images and the power of artistic production as different positionalities, as coming from different perspectives and points of view, and also being able to open and create new avenues for different perspectives and points of view. And so in order to analyze the conditions and the effects of artistic practices, one has to have multidisciplinary perspective, but also a transdisciplinary perspective. And in my own work, I'm actually thinking about the 50s and 60s using transdisciplinary methods, using the language and the criteria and the conventions and the formal analysis techniques, let's say, of art history, but also bringing to it the language of politics, the language of political theory, a historical overview. And the disciplines themselves are not fluid. So it's the way that we weave together, in a way, a more complex and heterogeneous worldview and point of view through disciplines that are themselves not fluid, and therefore opening up a sphere of heterogeneity. And I think that's what's kind of interesting for this experiment as school and place and space, is what can this heterogeneous praxis do? And that's what, in a way, is motivating me in my fabric. My book on Yves Klein was just published by Reaction Books in London. And this project is a way to rethink not only the practice of Yves Klein, an artist who was fundamental and formative in the 50s and 60s, but to also position him as the first among contemporary artists. So not the last of a kind of decadent and degrading context of Paris in the 60s that was overcome by New York as the center of modern art, but to really position him as the avatar of our present. And in that sense, it was to look at his conceptual contributions to artistic practice, but also to position him within the context of the 50s and 60s as a political artist. And this is something that was not done in any serious way with Yves Klein. He was very often thought of as, or narrativized as, a prophet, a seer, a mystic, and if not a prophet, a seer, a mystic, then some kind of problematic, reactionary artist who was too religious for the avant-garde, too commercial for the avant-garde, and also on the flip side, too material in a kind of negative way for avant-gardist aesthetics. So my project is to actually look at these paradoxes, the paradoxes of identity formation, the paradoxes of practices in the 1950s and 60s, and to ground them within the necessity of constructing a new public sphere, a public sphere that was demolished to all intents and purposes during the war, a public sphere that was destabilized, a model of bourgeois subjectivity that could no longer really be functional in the post-war world, and to position his contribution as one among many artists who was imagining a new public sphere, a new public, one that was indeed based on paradoxes and performativity. This is very important, that it's not only the paradox of that moment, but the activation of a performative practice, one in which the force of utterance is constitutive, the force of aesthetic utterance, and a force of utterance that is then linked to power dynamics that whose effect cannot be known, and yet there's an importance and an urgency to each utterance, to each aesthetic utterance, and one that creates then a paradoxical space.